Day. Subscriptions. Still not showing us live. Come on, man. What is this?
Let me try reloading mine again.
No, it's
Definitely not.
It's definitely this. Something wrong with the stream.
Ooh, love.
Like, it's showing up okay on the YouTube, I'm pretty sure. But it's not showing up well in StreamYard.
Like, well, sorry. I guess it's definitely not coming through on mine live for sure.
Yeah. No, neither on mine. Let's see if it's actually even recording to YouTube. Because if it's still recording okay, it's fine. We just don't have to have the actual live thing. Content. No, I want content. I want live. Did it record anything here? Can't even see the new live. Alright, it says we're live. Let me try and do something. Let me try and share this. And if you can go onto the Discord and click on this. Don't switch. Let's click on this link. See if that shows up. That could be the same.
No. It says the video is private. We got it in like some private / I get the this like alert on it.
Try now.
Let me re-click it. Oh baby. Oh, let's turn it up.
Hey. So it's showing up.
Ooh.
Nice. Okay.
So the video is private.
Cool.
There you go. Nice. I don't know what you did, but very good.
Some weird settings going on.
Private / I get the...
Yeah, okay. Maybe it's because I had these set on private accidentally without realizing. This is possible.
Yeah, cool.
All right. Enough dicking around. Ready?
Let's do it.
Look at my notes. Yep. Here we go.
We all can be mortals.
Yes, indeed, everyone. Welcome to a Mere Mortals Musing session. This is where myself, Kyron,
Juan on the other side.
and Juan, we get together. Usually is in a location like this. This might be one of the last ones. We said this last week or 2 weeks ago, where this would be the last one we'd do in person. But we're here again. So Juan's made the effort. Thank you very much, Juan. And a music session is where we pick a topic, a theme, and we dive deeper into it. So we explore it a little bit more. Philosophy, not in the park, but definitely
Indoors.
Deep conversation with a lighthearted touch. Today being the Wednesday, 26th of April. So my turn to choose the topic. And I have had this kind of list of just random little things that would be fun to talk about if nothing really calls to me. And I sometimes go to that. And sometimes one of them will jump out at me because I'll realize, oh, I was thinking about this. I just forgot to write it down. So I have actually been thinking about today's topic, which is duty. And the reason this came up was, one, I'm reading a book called The Debacle, which is all about the French, like 1870 war, Franco-Prussian war, something like that. So a lot of military duty involved there. And then a Confederacy of Dunces, it also came came up where there was this guy, Ignatius Riley, and he was basically a do-nothing like sort of person, drained on society. And a lot of people were saying like, you know, who's this fat slob? He's not doing anything, you know, he has no shame, no responsibility, that sort of stuff. I was like, you know what? This has surfaced before due to my somewhat non-participation in society, if you wanted to call it like that, which is I don't have the standard 9-to-5 job. And so there could be questions of, are you doing anything that's worthwhile for society? Are you partaking in society? Is this the kind of person we want in Australia? You know, many different things there. I actually looked up the definition of duty. So it can be a commitment or expectation to perform some action in general, or if certain circumstances arise. And another would be a moral obligation or responsibility. That's probably the easier way of thinking about it. So
moral obligation or responsibility.
So there's quite a few ways that this can come up, and I wanted to start first with this one. I suppose the theoretical aspect. Can you owe without first being given? So is it possible for me to have a duty to do without first having been given things? So in this case, I would maybe say, just imagine, you know, take every random Australian, and no matter what their circumstances in life, their character, their personality, how they were raised, who they were raised by, under what circumstances, up until the age of 18, would any of those people have, or would all of them have a duty towards their family, towards the country? Let's maybe just stick with the country for the moment. Is there any moral obligation or responsibility those people have to anything, I suppose?
I guess I'd have to land with, this could become, it's very individual, hey, in terms of how you view it.
Yeah,
I would say yes in its most broad, logical summation sense. Like reduce or remove even the human from the equation. If something was raised for 18 years by another entity, would that thing being raised owe something to the entity? I would kind of go like, yeah, that sounds about right. Like you should be giving something back. Now, you could get into things that I'm talking about it like very abstract, but you know, if you raise a tree for 25 years, do you expect the tree gives you back something? Like, is it owing after 25 years? Not really. Like, you don't expect anything from it.
Where's my fruit, damn it?
Does the country expect of you something after 18 years? I think it's a little bit similar where it doesn't. Like, there's no imbued mandatory duty per se to the country, at least in Australia. That's what it feels like to me. Where there's other places in the world where it is
Israel.
different, right? It's a different thing. Oh, well, and I actually got on a call with Dad just before this one because I thought, I want to know about Colombia. Give me a little bit of details of what Colombia was like. I don't recall or know, given that I wasn't there until I was 18 years old. So for an example, in Colombia, and I'm paraphrasing here, so I might be a little bit off, but I think that would go to pretty right, is when you get to be 18 years old in Colombia, I don't know if this is still the case, but it certainly was for him, you go basically into a raffle. And the raffle is, there's a 10% chance to be, you have to do military service for 2 years.
Raffle.
You go into the raffle. Luck.
The worst way of putting it.
Now, he did say that people can get off if you're doing studies which is beneficial to the country in generality, or if you're doing something else that is reasonable that the country will let you off.
I assume if you're physically disabled or something like that.
I would also assume the same, yes. Yeah. But in essence, it's like, hey, we'll take 10% of the people. This is what the country, when you say everyone who hits that age, yes, there's something to be due, there's something owed to the country, and we'll take 10% of that at a just statistical average, and we'll just go from there. So some people get it, some people don't. Yep. I actually asked Dad that he didn't know anybody in our family. I think he said it was like a cousin or someone's cousin that did end up going through that, and they got into like quite dramatic trouble, not from being in the military, but from abuse of drugs and some other stuff. So I was like, oh, yikes. But regardless, someone like Colombia, there can be the mandatory. And yes, in Israel and in many other places in the world, China, you have the mandatory, hey, owe your country something by the time you're there. Obviously, we don't have it in Australia, so it's slightly different. But as a holistic idea, I go, yes and no. Yes or no? I don't know if I can align myself with one particular answer or the other. Or at least as from a country perspective. What about you? How would you think about it?
So I put it kind of this way. I think consent is one of the big things here. So if you're consenting to signing up for something, or if there's an obligation or responsibility, which is what duty is, then I think that you have to opt into it. You can't just be forced into it. So this is where I'm kind of going, even if you're raised in, the best of circumstances, you had, super privileged life, like your parents treated you nicely, your country did everything for you, stepped in to help out your mum when she got sick or something, or, with payments, or with, the maternity leave and, all those sort of things. You don't really consent to any of that when you're a child. It is what it is. You're born. So I'm not. It's one of those ones where I kind of go. A large part of me says a moral person should look after their elderly parents or something like that, but they didn't sign up for it by necessity. So I'm also kind of sympathetic towards someone who, if they're a complete asshole and they don't want to do any, duty towards their country, if they just say they've got like a negative temperament, right? They just absolutely hate everything, hate the world, despite being brought up in amazing circumstances in comparison to everyone else. And there are people like this. Look at many of the serial killers. They have normal as fuck families, as parents who raised them pretty nicely, and there's just something wrong in their brain that needs to kill people. That in that case, I'm kind of like, no, I can kind of feel some sympathy, a little bit of sympathy towards someone who doesn't want to. So
I would probably say there's a difference depending on the lens you look at it. Because when you see it at the broad spectrum, like you look just remove the naming and the names, and you just look at it as, hey, the population of Australia. If Australia went to war with insert X, whatever that may be, if you're looking at it like that big picture, is there a duty for people in that country to defend it if it's the just reason, if it's the right reason? I go, yeah. I feel like there's some to give here of protecting what has been given to you from that entirety of the country, whatever it may be, from a state perspective, resources, abilities, freedoms, whatever, right? There's the protection of freedom, there's the because you're patriotic, whatever it may be, whatever reason. But as a whole, I go, I can see where the answer might be, yes, you owe something to that. But as you start finessing and get really into the detail, I don't know where it becomes murky, but I know that at least when you're going like person by person, individual by individual, then it's almost slides towards the no. It can't just be that, yes, Karen needs to do this, Manshul needs to do this. I mean, Manshul's useless, so it doesn't matter. But, does it go to like each individual? Yeah, you can become really easily flexible to say no. I mean, no, because that person doesn't know how to do this and they don't have to do that. So there's kind of the paradox that if you went to each individual across Australia, you could kind of get the answer to be no for everyone. But if I look at it as a whole, there's like an overwhelming yes. And that's why I kind of go, I see it yes in the bigger lens, no if you're looking in a very micro lens, which can also show the difference between duty as a, what you think of duty from other countries or other cultures that you don't know about, to the individual duty of people to families, because it is very nuanced in that aspect. Yeah.
Well, I think this gets as well in towards the different types. And I think that's a really nice way of framing it. I think, yes, that's probably the best way, much like humanity, I kind of think is a positive as a whole. But if you go look at any individual human,
you can find that
all you just see is negatives. You just see, oh man, this emotional train wreck is screwing up the environment, and everything they do is bad.
Sure.
I was thinking about this the other day about ethically, how can you support things like an Apple phone, for example, or whatnot?
Given the lithium battery, given the lithium's getting extracted from the
cobalt earth. We're getting from the Congo. You're helping
12-year-old kids
to participate
mining.
in that.
Yep.
And it's it's far off, but you could go, okay, no, everything that you do is harming everyone else. I don't think there's a way you can live without harming another person by some indirect means. But if you look at humanity as a whole, I'm like, shit, I think we're doing some pretty good stuff. And
I think that gets to the word of being complicit and where you draw the boundary of complicity, as in, hey, we use phones. Are we complicit in the propagation of kids working in slave labor and all that? In some forms, you could say yes. You can get down to the very individual chains of how everything works and go, yes, you are.
Yeah.
You can also
this microcent that you paid for the phone.
Go, yeah. That's
where this came from.
But then you can also make the rifle conclusion in other ways and go, no, there's enough reference and splits and whatever that actually isn't you. That's probably the buck should have stopped at this particular point. I think you can similarly define duty in that way. And I bet you that if we were having a conversation with people from mainland China, if it was from people from Israel, if it was from people from Colombia, you would probably get very different views about what duty is. Even just like a really patriotic American. Like I'm imagining a Jocko Willink, what's his name, Tim, whatever. Yeah, a couple of people there. It's like duty to them from a patriotism perspective. It'd be like hardcore. It'd be like, yes, sacrifice this because it's the right thing. Maybe not all the way to that end, but there'd be some flavors of that. And you can get all the way to people who are not like that in the same state, country, area. So yeah, there's varying difference of it, especially when it comes to country, like civic duty to the country.
Yeah. So when I was also thinking about this, I was going, okay, what are the different types? If we're talking about moral obligation and duty, there's I think there's this really soft form and there's a kind of harder form. So if you look at something like a legal contract, if you sign up for something, I think that is where the duty is absolutely clear. There is a legal, not in, like a legal responsibility, sure, but there is a duty, a responsibility. Something is formed where you should do this, using the should word. I don't like the should word, but
you're using it.
If you're consenting to something, and it's, as I was talking in the definition, commitment or an expectation to perform some action in general, or if certain circumstances arrive. If something happens and you have said, I'm going to do this, that is, I think, where the word should is a useful word. And this is where so legal contracts, things like that, very explicit, very easy to consent to because you know exactly what should be done. This happens, this should be done. When it's more murky things such as spoken promises, I will do this if this happens, but it's not provable, it's not written down, it's not easy to verify, and then that's more of a soft form where it's the should word is maybe 80% or 70%. And the responsibility is 70-80%, and then you can get to this really wishy-washy civic duty things where it's kind of unspoken norms of what you should do. Your country goes to war, you should volunteer and participate or something like that. And so this is where I think it can range from very explicit, there is this duty, the moralness, the morality of it is crystal clear, to this other end where I go, I think you can debate a lot of that. And I'll borrow a term from agile software engineering, which they use, and I actually find that it applies across a much broader aspect of things, and here we'll see it. And it's a term called Moscow. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. M, capital M, little o, capital S, capital C, lower O, capital W. And what it stands for. So when you're actually doing product building and product designing, you try to, as best as possible, when you're working with business and you're working from a technical perspective, you want to, and this is just a version of doing it, you want to go down the path of Moscow. And what's that? You're trying to create things which is, you split it into must have, should have, could have, would have, right? And you try to simplify features, functionality, technology, etc. into these 4 big aspects. That's one aspect of doing it. And it kind of makes me think, as you were talking about contractually, it's that level. It's, you can have the aspect of the must have, or where it's very clear legal contract, or a contract. You can always think about it in a contractual way where it is a must do. That duty is a must do. And I think we should get into what do we consider the must haves, the must duties in our lives. Yep.
But then it goes on to the shoulds. And so that's where it starts becoming slightly more flexible. Okay, we should do this However, there's other must-haves or that could be flexible in the time frame. And so that contract is more flexible, and there's flexibility in different aspects. Time, value, effort, capability, resources, how well it's done, etc. Total outcome. Then you have your could haves. So that's like, hey, we could be doing this. And I think could have is probably where civic duty of the country kind of sits. As in, hey, I could go into the military. That's how we sit. You could go and perform, be in the reserves. You could go into just full military in all the different branches and help out. But it's not a should or must, unless particularly you're in a lineage of family that does it, right? And we're not. Sorry, we could be doing it, but we're not. And then there's the would have, where it's, right at the tail end, I think, of the duty level, where it'd be like, well, I would have done that, but I'm not. There's no impetus. There's no real contract against it. No one's making you do it. Those are probably, I would say, the duty of, maybe something in terms of relationships or keeping friendships or something like that. Those would be more around the woods. And, there might be a duty to be, happy and really positive to every single individual on earth. Maybe someone comes up with that. And they'll be like, well, you would do that, but lots of shit's going to come in your way and you're not going to do that. Like, so that contract is flimsy at best. You would never sign it because you wouldn't really ever follow it. That's right at the bottom. And in product designing, when you're running a would have, that's like, it's not getting done. That's basically it. So that's where I think the duties can fluctuate between.
And so that an acronym is used to, I guess, distinguish between things. So someone is working on let's just say a particular UI feature, which will...
Well, here, I'll give you an example. So this would be this is the duty, right? So even though it's a moral obligation to get something done, and we're talking about a website, right? What's the must-have of the website? Hey, you need the GUI. You need the general user interface for people to use it. You need a master header and a search. You must have that, right? We're going to have that. Cool. That's your must-have. Then next level of obligation of delivery. It should have this colors. It should have this fonts. Cool. Okay, that's your next level. That's your signing off. Then your could haves. Then you're talking about, hey, when it gets minimized, I want it to be non-functionally working like this. I want it to...
Light or dark mode.
Light or dark mode. I want it to have rounded corners. I want it to be accessible for a certain amount of people. Hey, we could do this. It's probably not going to best some other things, but whatever else. And your would haves would be, hey, I'd love if this went 3D. I'd love if this could go into virtual reality mode. I'd love it. Okay, cool. You would have, but when you go up the chain and towards the obligations of what you're delivering, if it's a website, hey, that's just an auxiliary. That you don't have to actually be doing that, even though you could. So I think put that parallel kind of to the duties. You can go all the way to some that I consider must-have, and it could be. And again, this is very personal because I think there's the duties that we have to the world and the duties that we have to ourselves. Those two boundaries, I think they can be very different, and that can fluctuate very much depending on the people. I think the externals. A little bit more general, like we're saying. I think civic duty to the country kind of sits more down the could way, depending on the country that you're living in. But then we can get into the conversation of things like, fitness and health. Where would that sit in like an internal duty or code or moral code? I guess you could also call it as well.
Yeah, who comes first, yourself or others? And this is where Jordan Peterson would be like, clean your own room, damn it.
Yep.
Look after yourself before you look after others and whatnot. But yes, very, very good debates to have. I think we should jump onto the Boostagram Lounge before we get on to the next section. And I think it's going to be a rather sad Boostagram Lounge this week. I'm not sure we got a single thing.
Oh, no. Well, here we go.
I don't think Dave...
Well, I can safely say that the last Boostagram that we got was the 14th of April. The Immortals podcast, new boost for all the splits, 1,000 sat cents. So we don't have Dave's usual weekly boost.
Yep.
We haven't seen any of the others come through. Karen, give me a rundown. What's happening?
I honestly have... Well, I think, look, part of it is probably... I think people are maybe starting to hurt financially just from life. That is a possibility of downturn and whatnot. I believe Adam was saying he kind of sees it on seeing it on No Agenda or something like that. So just in terms of support, I could see that happening. There have been changes to our own schedule, to our things that hasn't been kind of like as regular. I feel even though stuff has been released regularly, I think you can maybe sense in the atmosphere, me screwing you around, us doing it live, on through the laptop for the first time. You know, that sort of, you know, all those things could contribute. All I will say is let's look at the positives. I've set up the wallets now, so anyone who helps support the mere models, you're supporting Podverse, you're supporting Fountain, you're supporting CurioCaster, you're supporting Podfans, and you will soon be Podfriend once I get Martin's details. So all of those, and the Pod Sage himself, Dave Jones. So and the Podcast Index. So
yeah, true.
So pretty much all of those things getting kind of ticked off as if you're supporting us, you're supporting a whole
bunch of people.
Of people.
So use us. So, you know how sometimes people say like use us as a like button, use me as a dislike button on
yeah,
things.
true.
Use us as like supporting the broader podcast.
Correct.
2.0
Yeah.
space.
Yeah. You know, I don't know of any other shows that are doing this, and it feels good to be able to use the splits like this now. I probably will go and get some of their details and re-put this into old episodes. Once again, it's kind of like I'm doing all this stuff and I'm not sure it's going to carry over in the future, and it's just going to have to be rework. But fuck, you know, sometimes you just have to do that. Just be like, all right, I know this is not going to be forever.
Sure.
Whatever. I'll just do it as is. So yeah, all I would just say, you know, one of the things that did work with the last book reviews when I was kind of pleading and just saying, look, I don't even want a Boostagram, just send in that you're listening to us and whatnot. I think that would be nice for both of us just to have a comment come in. You can leave it on the YouTube channel. You could.
I think you did get one for the book review.
I did, and it was Nastia, and it was really nice. And she was saying, "Yeah, I do come into these. I do really value them. Thank you for doing that." And you know, that gave me a month's worth easy of motivation to keep doing the book reviews.
Yep,
easy. So I think something similar for this would be amazing. You know, can be via Twitter. You know, don't even have to do the Boostagrams, which we always talk about. Just reach to us out in some form and say, hey guys, I really enjoy what you're doing. Keep it up.
Yep.
You know, send in a comment related to baby stuff or Judy stuff if you want to. But yeah, just let us acknowledge that you're listening, because there's been a jump up in numbers on the downloads, but I wouldn't have said there's been a jump up in
the support
or the value for value in once again, it doesn't need to be value monetarily, can be value in just, you know, acknowledging that we're doing something that you enjoy. So
yeah, for sure. And I'll step back. Actually, I ran some numbers this morning specifically. I don't know why I wanted to do it, but I just did it. Now, look, these numbers are influenced by the fact that we are doing a lot more shorts. I'm not counting the Instagram shorts, but I'm counting the YouTube shorts. Okay. That does increase the numbers. And we don't have all of our numbers for our podcast listenership, nor did I have any for the Valley for Valley, because we just don't have them anymore, nor the other stuff that you've done as well. So, you know, mind you, this is like taking some, reducing a lot more. But I think overall, for views and downloads for the podcast across all platforms, it's about 478,000. And, you know, that's without the Valley for Valley and a few other things. So
half a million.
It'd be about 500,000. So when I look back over 3 years, yeah, it's probably been over 500,000 listens across all the episodes. That's freaking awesome. That's super cool.
Yeah.
And what we're asking, and we're talking about the Boostagram Lounge here, and you know, going towards the podcasting 2.0. You know, if over the next 3 years we get another 500,000, hell, it doesn't have to increase. Like, it doesn't have to increase. But if of those 500,000, we get 1% of people supporting us. What does that work out to be? Quickly, is that 50,000? 5,000.
5,000 if it's 1%.
Sure.
Yeah.
So 5,000. If you get 5,000 people supporting through with a pretty minimal amount of support,
$10.
right? That's a lot. Yeah. That's all. That helps us from the entirety of the podcast to continue. So we're not saying every single people that's listening to the podcast right now, please go and do it all. Yeah. Of course, we'd really appreciate it. But Sam Harris actually called this out as well. I remember ages ago. It's a few percentage who allow the podcast to continue. That's the same thing that we're asking from you today. Yeah. So make sure you support newpodcastapps.com out there. So make sure
be one of them. It's your duty.
Your duty to support. Absolutely. Okay, back to Judy.
Very much, very good. So, yeah, I suppose the ones that we have. So I was actually looking on the Wikipedia page as well for the definition and whatnot, and it does seem there's kind of three main ones which occur there: filial, i.e., family; civic, is to society and your country; and then legal, and so that is explicit. Legal ones, and legal ones can jump into the family and society areas and whatnot.
Okay. I would argue there's one more.
Okay.
I'd argue there's one more. I think that's familial.
Filial.
Filial, which is a family. Civic, which is country and the like and society. And then there's legal. I would say there's one more duty, and that would be personal duty. That would be an individual duty. I think that there's enough proof in the pudding and conversations to be had. There is an individual duty to be had for sure. So I'd create 4.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Silly Wikipedia.
All right. So let's start off with maybe the civic one. And there's just broad question. Is the draft a good thing? Yeah. Should there be a draft? Much like
the draft is
mandatory service.
Mandatory service for a limited amount of time.
Yeah. Well, I guess the draft is a bit different because from what I've read just in history, the draft is you get called up and there is no explicit you're only going to fight for 2 years or 1 year. It's kind of you're going to fight until we win this war type deal.
Yeah.
So the draft and mandatory military service. Draft being the excessive form of that.
Yeah.
Either of those.
Yeah, I think
in Wanistan.
In Wanistan, it's maybe, and I'm surprised to hear it, a little bit too extreme for me. I would say I know that in China they do. I don't know if they still do. But I know I've been told from Chinese friends that they go for a certain amount of months when they're in high school to go and do essentially some not service, but go through some military training if you'd like, and then you could choose to. I think choosing or not to, it's kind of like I don't know how true that is or how much I have to do it, but I would support some draft of that level. So I would say there would be a civic duty, but not for I think you'd have to have the option at the end of, would you like to now continue this fully and go and serve and whatnot, or not? So have that option. But maybe a few months, if I'd say, like almost like a unit of high school where you should do some sort of more regimented, learned patterns that maybe serve at overall civically from a country perspective, with a very much an option at the end of, cool, now you've seen it, you can continue, or you can now just go back to your normal duties, if you like, of the world. Yeah. So I'd say probably something to that effect. Yeah, what about you?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of either, to be honest. Once again, it's kind of the consent type issues of, can you consent to things that you don't even really know about? So if you're consenting to, military service, for example, it's one of those ones where it's kind of hard to know, consenting to killing a person, for example, that's such a extreme experience. There's no way you can really come into that knowing what that's going to be like. So just in terms of the draft, absolutely not. I think that one, if you don't want to fight for your country, I don't think you should be forced to. But I also think that it's not necessarily a bad thing that you get thrown in jail for that. If that was to happen, much like happened with Muhammad Ali. So he protested against the Vietnam War. He went to jail for a couple of years. I'm not sure it's necessarily the worst thing in the world that happens as well, which is kind of fucked up, because normally I would be 100% on the side of fuck the government, fuck people telling you what to do. But when it's that kind of existential crisis of the country potentially going down in flames, or society just straight up not working, would society have not worked if Muhammad Ali could protest and not face any legal consequences for that?
Yeah, well, and I think you've struck, and this is well too deep of a conversation for us to have here. Nor do I have the required skills to talk about it. No, but not the philosophical, but there's a difference between government and state, right? And governing and governance does not have to mean you don't have to have a state to have governance or rules ready in place. So I think what you're saying is, in that option, hey, it's okay to have rules that if you don't do this, you go to jail. That's the governance part of it. It's almost the state part, which is what you would consider, I guess, more of. You look at China, it's like, oh no, you must do this. That's like the state telling you, this is now, looking at the Moscow thing, hey, that's a must duty. Go and do this. You must go do this. You must go and follow this particular way of that we are thinking about. That's the, what do they call it? Like I don't know. But again, it's a state perspective. Whereas from a governance rule perspective, again, that might be a must or a should duty, but there's very clear definitions of, hey, if you don't do this, cool, you go and do that. You go to jail. Or you do this and you do actually go and serve for the military or do whatever it is for your country. So I think there can be very nuanced differences between the government and the state, or the governance and rules and the state, and you can have one without the other. But I would say, at least for me, like when you define the draft as like going and fighting, I would say, no, I'm probably not in favor of that, but I am in favor of the governance or the rules that could be applied through the mentality or the training of that allows. Then the next one is whether you then go and commit to fighting or doing something that is almost ideological in nature, whether it's ideological to the country, ideological to the individual, whatever it may be. I go, there's got to be a choice for the human there. Like the human's got to make that. But against the rules, or like a base level of rules or governance or requirements, I think everyone should go through that. In a similar way that, you're talking socially, I totally am happy to say that I think that anyone going through school, you should do from some minimum level of physical fitness, right? I don't think that it should be an opt-out process unless you can't for whatever reason do it, right? Like I'm not saying you're going to get a blind person and go and make sure that they go do a 5K run on their own. Okay, obviously that sounds dumb. But there should be a minimum requirement of, hey, there's this level of physical preparedness that people should go through. That's kind of how I see it from that perspective. When you're talking draft, I'm like, that would be the minimal, but then there's a choice to be made for going above and beyond.
Okay. All right. What about related to the, I suppose, society or community, maybe is the best way of putting that. So there's a civic duty. So some examples for this would be you get called up to be a juror. So, helping serve the legal system. That's kind of a civic duty, which is typically come up. If you're a new person joining the country, so say you're an immigrant and you're coming into Australia, how necessary is it, mandatory is it your duty to not only go through the process of immigrating, but you have to swear an oath to Australia. You have to, fill your heart with, I don't know the national anthem and things like that. I don't know 100% if that's still true. It was certainly the case a few years ago. How much of those things are necessary or a duty, do you think?
Yeah.
So for this one, for me, I think it's once again on the softer form. If you're opting in, and wanting to become part of Australia, I definitely think there should be some sort of statement you have to say, kind of swearing some loyalty to it or whatnot. If you're opting in, if you're here, born here, and you have no choice in the matter, yeah, I think that's fine if you never have to swear allegiance to the flag or like they do in America, or really explicitly make clear, I owe this country something. It's kind of the opt-in thing. I'm consenting to coming into this country. Yeah, sure. So the civic duty of voting as well. That's another one here. Once again, it's such a tricky topic because normally I would say if people don't want to do something, I don't think they should have to. But I'm also really okay with the current Australian system, which is if you don't vote, you don't have to. You're not going to go thrown in jail, but you will incur a small fine. And I'm okay with that to incentivize voting.
Yeah.
It's not even, it's actually de-incentivizing. It's de-incentivizing or decentivizing. I don't know what that word is. Not voting.
Yeah. I'd probably, I think I'd be somewhere similar in that there is a duty to perform activities so that the mechanics of government continue. So, I think there is a duty that if you are, say, again, we're talking about Australians, but this applies to whatever country. If there's a way that, the government goes through the Medicare or providing of medical assistance to Australia as a whole, yes, you could look at it as opt-in if you want it. Yeah, you can opt out of it. But I think there's a duty to opt into a lot of these things because it's the mechanics that makes the government work, or the governance or the rules that we all live under. Again, you can choose not to. You can choose to go off-grid and do whatever, but then you pay the penance for it. You pay the issues, whether it's jail time, whether it's fines, whether it's whatever else, and that's fine. We're not saying that it's it's not so again, it comes to, it's not ideological driven. It's rules driven. There's some logic behind it. Either you do it and this happens, or you don't do it and this happens. I think where perhaps not, and that's what you're saying, it's where it's almost the ideology. So, you have to denounce caring for any other country, and you must say that you're loyal to Australia until the day you die, and you have to believe in this particular, this is extreme, but it'd be like, you have to be a Marxist if you want to come to, okay, you're talking ideology. That's not so much rules. I'd probably go away from that. I'd be like, okay, you shouldn't, that's probably not the duty that I would say that you'd have to have, but the ones that allow the mechanic of governance or governments to perform, yes, okay. I'd say that's a duty that you have to perform to be in that space or that environment or that social construct that you're living in.
I remember when Andrew Yang was going for the presidency of the United States, and he was really running on this UBI, Universal Basic Income idea, which is essentially our country is wealthy enough, and there's a lot of jobs, a lot of things that people do unpaid, which is not recognized by our society, looking after elderly parents, of doing these kind of jobs which are kind of beneath the surface, or they could be disabled or something, but they still spend a lot of time in looking after their son's soccer team or something like that. It's all of these things which don't get acknowledged nor paid, nor directly paid for. Whereas things, you can also have high-paying CEO jobs where it's just one person, they're just managing an organization, but they're earning millions and millions, like multi-millions. And his kind of idea was, everyone should get just enough to live. So this was kind of $1,000 a month, I believe, was what he was talking about. So, 12 grand over a year. Mm-hmm. And I remember when he was saying that there needs to be like an explicit thing of acknowledgement saying, when you accept this money, you are accepting it because you are, it's kind of like the duty of the country is coming towards you or something, or like the country is supporting you, and so you also need to acknowledge that duty and that responsibility, I guess, rather than it just being, I deserve this 12 grand for just being American or whatever. And I thought that was interesting, but then I was going like, how do you do that? How can you, should it be, to get the 12 grand, you have to do an hour's worth of community service, not even for the community service portion of what actually is physically getting made better, but just to show that you kind of care enough to do that. Should it be a written statement? Is it even necessary? Would people not become entitled and whatnot if there was no explicit, like, you're getting this money because you're a contributing person of our society? I don't know. I thought it was interesting when it came up, and then when I started thinking, like, how would you put that in practice? I went, I don't know. I could just see that turning into total wasted time bullshit of people doing community service, but no, they're not actually doing it. They don't give a shit, and in fact, it's creating more resentment. Yeah,
difficult. It's very difficult. I mean, I think that concept in generality, it's probably why we don't see things like that just very, very easily just applied, because there is not just so much layers in the controlling parties that are implementing that, but the nuances and the variations that you could have would just be wild. And to do so, no matter what policy or procedure or rule you put in place, someone's going to be fucked for it. Someone's going to like it. Someone's going to really like it. And you could make cases very easily for each layer. And so then to make the duty, the social duty that comes along with that, or it's really at a point in time, it's going to serve some, it's going to not serve others. And depending on where you sit, historically on that, it's going to look good or it's going to look bad. We could be sitting here and say just about the UBI. I'm sure someone could make a reasonable conjecture back and be like, hey, no, it's really good because of this, and you're just stupid because you don't realize this. It's like, shit. I don't know anyone who would be able to, I'm sure there's lots of people who could articulate it really well. I just don't know if there could be any single truth to that particular viewpoint.
All right, filial duty. What do you owe your parents or your family?
Yeah, this one's an interesting one. I think as I've gotten older, and of course about to become a parent, there's more realization of holy shit, there's actually a lot that I owe to the family. And I'm not talking like just direct family. I'm talking about much more broader family. One aspect to me, I think, is that duty is hidden until those crucibles in life where, hey, shit, this is about to happen. I now understand how much difficulty, effort, expenditure, sacrifice was made to also get me to this point. So because I'm going through that transition, I think there's more. I'm more moving towards that. Yes, there is a duty to look after those who looked after you for a very long time. There's a duty to reward. I think there's a saying, and this is not just family, but I would say also the close friends. I'm not talking like general people you know. I'm talking about the inner circle of friends. I think it's what's the saying? I think it's like, if they're behind you, right, protect them, and that's generally your friends and your family, right? If they're beside you, respect them. And that can be again friends and family. But if they're in front of you or they're blocking your way, and again that can be the friends and family. Okay, then that can vary. Trample them, destroy them. So, but I agree with that behind them and side them mentality of, and more. Yes, there's some level of protection, of care, of respect, of joining and bringing along for the journey that is life. That I think there's a duty to that, and there's also a bit of joy behind that too. It's almost the ability to give back and support those who have supported you along the way. I would say, hey, there's a duty to that, and in fact, it's probably going to be a joyful thing that you can do that, as opposed to it being very, very much the opposite way. So I think I'm starting to lean towards more of that. Again, back to my terminology, probably the should level. Hey, there should be that level of duty. I'm not saying must. I know for sure people will hate the must. I've only got one must, I think, in my mind. But this one's like a should. You should make this a duty in your life. The was it the filial?
Filial,
yes. The filial duty. What about you?
Yeah, pretty. I really do like that terminology. I'd probably put it in the should kind of area as well. I think it's important to distinguish between blood filial duty and kind of like caring. So you can have a blood relative. I don't think you owe a single damn thing to them just because you happen to have a genetic link, which is stronger than the genetic link that you and I share, which is spread over more generations. Because ultimately we are all connected at some point in somewhere in the human chain to each other.
We're all the same monkey eating mushrooms back in the day, folks.
That's it. Yeah. So the blood type, do you owe more to the adoptive parents who raised you, or the blood ones who physically gave birth to you? The adoptive ones. I think that's easy. In that case, it is kind of, okay, yeah, if someone cared for you, if they spent a lot of energy and effort raising you, protecting you, maybe doing some bad things to you in terms of psychologically abuse or physical abuse, that's when it gets real tough and tricky. My parents were amazing, and so I owe them a lot, and I think there is a huge duty on my part to try and make their later years of their life as best possible. I definitely see that. If they had physically abused me as I was growing up, I think that's okay, where it's like, yeah, you know what, there's the negatives of how I was raised are starting to outweigh some of the positives.
Then there's yeah. So like them calling you Karen, that's just a level of abuse.
It's pretty bad, man. It's pretty bad. It's caused a lot of problems.
But I think I think in general people would probably agree with us, and the reason being, I'm thinking, when you hear of someone bad out there, right? You hear the bad stories like, the mum's or grandmother is in a care home. They don't care. They should help them out. They should go do this. They should. It's a should. I think it's all around the should. You can't. I don't think you can ever really say like, hey, you must be doing this for your family because they're looked after. No, you don't. You must. Doesn't come part of the picture. But you should. I think there's a duty to. You should do this if there's enough reason to do so, for sure. But you also don't know of every single little nuance and detail behind someone's situation. So you might go, hey, it might be a should for a reason, and there's specifics for why it might not be. So I think people probably would agree with us in that side of being a should.
Yep. All right, the legal one I think is pretty clear cut. If it's written in paper and you consented to it, that's a must.
Yeah,
I think. What do you put it in the terms of? okay, if there was obfuscation or misleading of the actual terms or contracts. So this could be, oh yeah, you're just going to do obstacle courses in the reserves, and then you sign up, and then, oh no, wait, you actually are going to Afghanistan now, and you, whatever, whichever war our countries decide to.
I mean, if you're signing for it though, if you're signing and you're putting it down, right, and it has that terminology. If it doesn't, then that's another ball game, right?
And then I suppose the other one I was going to put with this was...
Well, I'll give you another example. When I used to work at Accenture, right? It said in the contract, you are expected to work more hours than the full-time normal time that you have. But it doesn't say how many, right? So you're going to be essentially paid for 40 hours a week. But in the contract, it says you will have to occasionally, something like that, have to work more hours. But then there was a period of time when the expectation was, hey, you're working 60, 70-hour weeks. That's what it is. That's the expectation. Now, technically, you did sign that. And it could it like obfuscated enough that it says like, hey, we can tell you to do this 70 hours. Is that a must? Like, it's your duty that you are working 70 hours. And I can tell you, there were some people who did, and there were some people who didn't. They were like, no, this is my family. How did I pay off? It wasn't that you got fired. It was when it came to getting promotions and your money, the person who put in the time did. The person who didn't get the money. That's it. As simple as that. Essentially, just like the effort that you were putting in what you were delivering to the company. But there's probably another example of obfuscation because you're hiding behind the non-specificity that it's been detailed there that you signed for.
Yeah. What about, is there any sympathy in your mind for someone who signs for something, but in their own mind, it meant something else? And so maybe the words are clear cut for 95% of humans reading it, but for 5% they read it and it goes, just simple misunderstanding of, let's just say, okay, here's a perfect example. My friend Rodrigo, who I talked about in the monthly goals, yesterday he was going to go to soccer training. And he said in this kind of group chat, I'm going to be late. There's a bit of traffic. And the coach said, it's a public holiday, mate. And that's kind of the response and reply. Rodrigo, with his English, which is okay, but not native, he was going, oh, does that mean training is not on? Because he said, it's a public holiday, mate. My brother thought, oh, the interpretation of that, it's a public holiday, mate, we understand there's going to be traffic or something. Now, the actual intention was, it's a public holiday, mate. There's no reason that you should be late. Now, that's 3 different interpretations of the same, it's a public holiday, mate, 5 words.
Yeah.
So this is where it's like, okay, if there was like a contract or something written up, do you give any leeway to someone who claims, I didn't understand this, even though I read it, it's written down and I consented to it. It's just not what I thought I was consenting towards.
Yeah, okay. The way as you continue to describe that, yeah, I can understand it. I think
I put not much, because I think that's the whole point of legal contracts and whatnot. It's to try and bring it as close to the surface as whatnot. There's the whole point of law, the law system. And this is why lawyers will argue over single words in court of what is the interpretation of that, what is the word justified mean in this context?
Yeah, of course. Look, I'd say I would put it down to, there's the wording, but there's the intent of the wording. But even in that case, I would say, if you're talking legal contracts, what's your duty to something? I would have some leeway of sympathy that if someone read, 95% of people understood it, but 5% didn't, and it was written down, but it was that they maybe missed the intent, right? So the words are the same, but the intent was missed, and it's a 5%. I feel sympathetic, but I still go, there was a duty to meet that particular thing, and that the onus on you. Because the flip side is, if we don't do that, then you're in a whole like what level of justice or utilization of the legal system can you then apply? Because then you open yourself up to
everyone's argue about everything.
Yeah,
Nothing
and
means
so then
nothing is real. Nothing is true.
So because everything can be challenged, nothing is solid, and so then you have more of a problem. So I'd go sympathetic, but I feel like you would still have to face the consequences if you didn't follow that through.
Yeah, pretty much the same for me. And the what was the other thought I was going to get to with that? Yeah, pretty much the same. What? All right, personal. The last one. What?
So this was I was making sure I wanted to get this particular quote, and I think you're going to know what it is. It's from Socrates,
Ooh,
and the quote is,
Socrates.
"It is a shame for a man, but insert here woman, for you out there if you're a woman, to grow old without seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable of, or her body is capable for." And I think this is when it comes to the individual duty, the duty of a mere mortal, right out there, folks. And I think this is my only must. This is my only must when I read this through. I think there is undoubtedly for me, there is no question that there is a duty to oneself to reduce the burden that you are on society as a whole. Full stop. That's it. And where it comes down to, I think it's your health and your fitness perspectives. Because for mine, I go, hey, if you become a fat slob, or you just get entangled with the wrong things with society in general, or you become a bad person in the way that culture sees you, you're making a burden of yourself in society. You're taking away funds or resources for other things to be done. So if you're talking from a health and fitness perspective, it's just over your lifetime. It's probably going to cost hospitals and governments, and then what taxation is done in the existing financial system. You're going to take out of that to support you. So for me, I go, this is not a could, would, should. Nah, I think for me, this is a must, where your duty should be to reduce the burden that you are on society as a whole. I'm talking society, family, friends, etc. Now, don't take this, folks, to mean, hey, you should be just this little useless pinprick that no one's like working with. Nah, completely the opposite. As in, you should be working to a point where you're providing back to the community, whether it's the family, the community, the country, whatever you choose to do, but you're adding, you're not net zero or negative to whatever circle you want to put yourself in. And I go, there's that aspect of the fitness and health, which, dude, like that always is going to personify me from a lot of ways. But I think individually, everyone should, and that's why I'm not saying, hey, you should become like the fittest and the strongest or whatever. But you should aim to find a version of oneself that removes the burden that you may have on society as a whole. And I go, that is a duty that I think every mere mortal should have. That is a must of reducing the burden that you have on society in general. You included, right? Remove the burden on yourself of being lazy, fat, tired, etc. It's just, I can't think of one reason as to why you wouldn't want that to happen.
Yeah, when you say it, I don't instantly agree with it. I find
this would be a strong point. I think this is the only extreme point I think I'm exhibiting in this conversation.
And is this just related to physical health?
No, I apply this broader concept of, I'm talking, from
so like, for example, I haven't paid taxes in 6 years, 7 years almost. Is that getting towards me being a drain on society? Because I'm not contributing. I'm not contributing to the roads. In fact, I'm taking away because the government pays me
not
back.
In general. Not in general, because I would say even in your situation, and again, let's put it at a person who's like, hey, not like incredibly wealthy, but hey, making enough money from other sources that they're not paying it and not paying any taxes. I'd still go, hey, taxes is one way of paying back society in general. But from you, I'd say, hey, you're fit and healthy, that you're not leeching on the system and borrowing all from like health and perspective.
I'm not going to bulk bill doctors. I'm not going to Centrelink.
I would put it in this way. I
don't think my existence is causing other people to have to do extra work.
Se. I'm kind of like I'm not like an extreme capitalist, but I'm a capitalist in nature. And I'd go,
I'm pretty.
If
pretty
you
close.
you had Australia as a country, and you picked up current, and you dropped them, you took them away. If you had like the number from Australia and you can look at it in different ways, happiness score, financial score, all these sort of things, right? I don't think that it would be all of a sudden like, hey, taking current away improved it. I would say it'd be like, hey, very minimal or actually you've made it worse now, the current's on here.
Okay.
Like by a very slight, that's like my view of that must duty. So that if you're there, it's almost like, hey, you're positive for Australia. And yes, you might not be contributing from a taxation perspective to the roads, but you sure as hell are from a capitalist perspective helping communities because you're buying things, you're spending on things, you're keeping yourself healthy and fit, you're not using hospital systems and the like. That's what that would mean. You could have someone who is, paying the taxes and whatnot, but is using, as much Centrelink or hospital as much as possible. They're a drain on, insurances or the utilization of XYZ blood donations, all of this, which is like, hey, that in summation is actually more of a drain on society and what you're expending than what you're paying back. So that individual, however you might picture him, you take him away from Australia. It's like, hey, that's actually made Australia better, or insert whatever country you're from. That's where I go. That's the must civic duty. The duty of an individual to not burden society and to either keep it neutral or slightly make it more positive.
Yeah. I kind of get it. It's kind of getting into my kind of worldview of even the larger aspect, not even just society, but the world as a whole of making the world a better place, or like leaving it. It's better that you existed than you didn't exist, and that's just kind of like living a good life, I guess.
Yeah. And look, and this one very much is a personal thing. I'm talking fitness specific, but it is that it's the classic. If you were 40 or 50,
Juan hates fat people.
Yeah, if you're 40 or 50 years old, and the individual that you could have been from a health fitness perspective steps out, and you're maybe tired, maybe chronically ill, maybe inside whatever, sore, injured, that 40, 50-year-old stepped out and was like, hey, you could have been done this if you performed the duty of being the best person you could. I just go, man, that would suck. That would suck balls. So for me, I'd go, hey, there's a duty that, if theoretically that were to happen, the 40-year-old one or the 50-year-old one, or insert whatever age you want, it's going to be exactly the same one that's standing in front being like, yeah, cool. He did the things that he needed to do to be, the best that he could. So from that Socrates quote, I go, yeah, it's a shame for no man or woman to have known or established what they're...
Now, that quote again, does it reference society or it's just for themselves?
This is just for themselves. And that's what I'm saying. It is a shame for a man to grow old without seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable.
Yeah, see, I'm more sympathetic towards that, which is if you want to live a life of drugs, alcohol, abusing your body and whatnot, I think you can. But it's just so dumb. It's just like the most idiotic thing you can do. It's kind of the ivory tower people who focus everything on just like the mental aspect. Like I don't have time to exercise is the classic one, and I just think that is just. With that level of idiocy, I don't even think that duty comes into it. It's like you're so stupid. You didn't realize that how important physical health is. I don't even know if duty even comes into it. That's just like you're fucking scum.
Scum is what you are. Sub-immortal is what you are.
All right, let's summarize this. So for me, on the whole, I gotta say I'm not that big a fan of the sentiment. When I hear duty comes up, it's usually in a military context. I'm not a fan of violence, and that kind of gets mixed up with it. Responsibility is something I've shied away from a lot in my life. I remember explicitly in kind of university thinking, why would anyone seek out responsibility? This is kind of before I'd heard of Jordan Peterson in particular, but I went, responsibility just seems like such a stupid thing. Just restricts freedom. Responsibility of having a mortgage restricts your financial freedom of being able to get different jobs, travel. You're locking yourself into things. I now appreciate more the responsibility aspect of voluntarily choosing it, and I think what I was getting mixed up at that time was responsibility imposed upon you. You have to do this because this person tells you this, or this society tells you this, or your government tells you this, things like that. Or your mum and dad, your family tells you this. So in that case, I'm kind of becoming a bit more sympathetic towards it. But in the end, it's just a hard topic, man. I think from this, nothing is really set in stone that we've come out clear. I actually really enjoyed that Moscow.
I actually like that. And that's actually paid off that using that just obviously in software development, but in a lot of other ways. I find it's really useful to have conversations with
So
people.
why is it Moscow? Just because must, should...
M for must, O, just a little...
Yeah.
Moscow is like O, little O. S, should, C, could, little O. W, would. Moscow.
Yeah.
Look, the way I would summarize it, and I didn't talk about this in the podcast, but I think it probably helps summarize it, is that, as always, it's a bit of a slider. It's about across the spectrum. But I think duty, for me, there's the responsibility. There's responsibility across the entire spectrum, but that responsibility can be very much externally placed, intrinsically based, and so there's a certain levels and layers where that can be shifted, because the responsibility that we have to do this podcast, the duty for us to do this podcast, or to support our country, that answer of responsibility can be very different, whether you're a listener of our podcast, whether you're a random person out on the street, whether you're us, or to support the country, whether you're a military leader or not, right? So responsibility varies widely, and we have to acknowledge that in terms of duty. But then there's the level of accountability. And I think accountability is very much self-placed. And so the duty that you might talk through, and we just talked about filial, civic, legal, for me, I'm also like individual. Then you've also overlaid that accountability. And I think that's where you apply the Moscow, right? That's your personal level of what's the accountability, irrespective of the responsibility, right? But it generally lines up. But you might have the accountability be even stronger than responsibility. And that can then determine where that duty gets placed. So for me, as an example, for the personal, when it comes to fitness, the responsibility for me, hey, it's pretty high from like broadly across society, and that's probably not as high. But accountability, it is very high, and that kind of points to me, hey, there is a very strong duty there. I am accountable 100% for what that is ultimately for me. And then you go to the spectrum, something like serving for your country. That's a duty. Okay, my accountability for that is lesser so. The responsibility is already, it's like a preset one by the country. Again, that starts to fade towards the more could, because the accountability is low or lower and the responsibility is lower. So that kind of shifts the territory that way. So that's kind of my summary on duty there.
All right.
Very good.
Thank you, everyone. There's a fun topic to dive into. Mm-hmm. What is your duty as a mere mortalite? Well, your duty is to provide some value back. We are doing the value for value system here. You will never hear ads on this. You will never hear sponsorships. You will never have conflicts of interest. Everything that we do here, we do because we think it's the right thing to do. It's our duty to do the right thing. As one has the accountability, trying to get these episodes out on time, producing the twice a week, sometimes 3 a week, that sort of deal. Mm-hmm. We take that seriously, and so we try and provide as much value, and we just ask that you provide that back. This week, as we were saying, we just want to hear some encouragement, some support, that people are actually listening, that it's not just the AI robots, it's not just the, suck hole of scrapers and all sorts of shit that you can find on the internet. Just some actual people are enjoying this show. If you want to go and extend your duty beyond that little portion there, you can share it with a friend. You can provide some topics, things that you think that might be interesting, book recommendations, all that sort of jazz. And then finally, you could send in a Boostagram. So Boostagram is a message with a payment of Satoshis attached to it. You can find this in any of the podcast apps that I mentioned earlier about that we're helping to support as well. Podverse, Podfans, Fountain. I haven't got Cast-O-Matic and Breeze in the splits yet. Maybe if I see them doing some things.
Some things.
Yeah, they've kind of trailed off, so maybe them.
Yep.
But you can also go onto them as well. And Curacaster, for sure. So all of those sort of ones, Podfriend. Go onto any of them, upload some Satoshis into your wallet. I know I'm not using the correct terminology, but you'll get there. You'll get there one day, and send in a message to us. And yeah, we read it out every Wednesday live, 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time.
Correct. All right, folks, thank you very much for joining. It is your duty to go out from here and enjoy the world that is. The Immortalites One out.
Kyron out.
Good. Good. Very good.
Thank you, everyone. I'll be in the Discord if you feel like saying hi. Peace.
Have you seen Peter around the traps?
I know.
Reporting on the podcast?
Yeah.
Okay.
Tons. Yeah. Yeah. I even sent him that Discord message and just never got back to me. So who knows?
I wonder what happened there.